Thanks for being here, Potterheads. You've got a new chapter for Backward with Purpose, Part 1, Always and Always, by Dead Woodpecker. We are on Chapter 46, Always and Always.
Chapter 46, The Sweet Far Thing. Chapter text. The country lane was quiet. A spring breeze rustled the leaves in the orchard, and dappled sunlight shone through. Harry put his hand on the small of Ginny's back and stared at the crooked building that had countless good memories attached to it. In many ways, he had been given back his stolen childhood. This building, along with Hogwarts, Godric's Hollow, and Grimmauld Place, had been a kind of home. Not fully, not completely, but his experience with his parents in that strange limbo between life and death had taught him what he valued most: home. And the Burrow came close to being the home he had never really had, because of the people in it. They had not yet been back here. Spring had eased into summer, and it had been an unspoken agreement that Harry, Ginny, Ron, and, by default, Hermione, would not go back to the Burrow until most of the mess that had been made had been cleaned up. It was a reward, but the Death Eaters who had not been taken down at the final battle had been rounded up, given trials, and thrown into Azkaban. The Dementors had been exiled. The Ministry had welcomed the Muggleborns back with recompense, apologies, and a large ceremony. A large ceremony much like that had taken place earlier this afternoon. Harry grimaced, remembering. I hate giving speeches, he thought sourly. Ginny, who obviously felt something through the ephemeral connection they now shared, squeezed his hand. Though she doesn't really need to feel my feelings to know what's going on in my head, Harry admitted to himself. He glanced down at her. She knew him almost better than he knew himself. They had been inseparable since the moment Harry had caught her. Are you ready? Asked Ginny. Harry nodded. They walked, hands clasped, the rest of the way up the lane. It seemed like a different lifetime, and Harry knew very well what having two separate lifetimes felt like. When he had been exiled from the Burrow, he could remember the snow crunching under his feet, could feel the weight of his trunk, and could hear the distant shouting. But the anger, resentment, and hurt that had sunk into his bones had disappeared. His heart felt very light. I'm glad that's over, said Harry. He fiddled with his Order of Merlin First Class for valor. It was the size of his fist, made out of blown glass with an ebony base inlaid with opals and diamonds. Inside it was a blue flame that would burn forever. He could not keep his eyes from traveling back to it every few moments. Me too, Ginny said, heartfelt. Kingsley's pretty brilliant, you know? I never quite appreciated that fully. Harry could not agree more. Kingsley, who had assumed the position of Minister for Magic with skill, had spun a tale of half-truths that did enough to explain exactly why Harry, Ginny, and Ron had received a new class of the Order of Merlin. They had, of course, refused to explain about the time travel. He had briefly wondered if he was drawing his secrets close to him as Aberforth had once accused Albus Dumbledore of doing. But the potential for disaster was too great. No, it was best if it remained a secret. Future spouses would know, of course. Someday Harry and Ginny, Ron and Hermione would tell their children. What was that? Ginny asked, startled. What was what? Harry furrowed his brow. That feeling you just had. She looked perplexed. I've not felt it before. Don't you sometimes wish this emotion-sharing thing came with a textbook? Harry asked. Yes, Ginny replied immediately. And then we could have Hermione read it and tell us what's happening. It was frustrating not to have a name for this new level of sharing. What had seemed like a fluke after Voldemort had tried to kill Ginny and had been felled with his own rebounded curse had become something permanent. Harry could feel her inside him as if he was blown glass, and she was everlasting flame. You're thinking about me, Ginny said. But what was it you thought about before? There was this tenderness I've never felt off you. I thought about the children we're going to have, Harry admitted. He felt another little burst of joy and could not tell whether it came from Ginny or himself. His future stretched out before him. There were no regrets. Voldemort was gone, and Harry did not feel that awful pain that he'd known would never go away. He was free to grow old with her, to father children, and to live and laugh. Let's go inside before we start grinning at each other all night, said Ginny. Again, Harry had expected they would be the last to arrive. The burrow was filled to bursting with members of the Order of the Phoenix. Only those who knew everything had been invited. Tomorrow, there would be a public party on the grounds of Hogwarts. Tonight, a more private celebration was in order. So the crooked little home was bustling with everyone Harry loved most, except Ron and Hermione. "Where's Ron?" Harry asked anyone who would listen. "I want to tease him for crying." "Hermione's probably comforting him," Fred smirked. He gave Harry a small grin, but looked away quickly before walking off to find George. Harry watched him go, feeling a small pang. He had hoped that all could be forgiven and forgotten. It had seemed as though things were heading that way before the final battle. He winced when he remembered the way in which he had thrown the truth at them. He'd slapped them in the face with it. It had felt great at the time. He'd felt vindicated. He'd wanted to hurt them as much as they'd hurt him, and it had not helped matters any that he had been drunk. He did not like being reminded how self-righteous he had been. "We'll just have to work at it," Harry murmured. "It'll happen," Ginny said bracingly. Harry nodded. His newly positive outlook on life in general was strong enough to endure the slight distance at which the Weasleys had kept themselves from him. It couldn't last forever. He'd make it up to them eventually. He could not help, however, looking around for Arthur Weasley. Perhaps it was because he was at the burrow, and it might have been because he could use advice, but Harry found himself wishing that he could take some snacks out to the shed. More than that, he wanted the type of relationship that he once had with Arthur. Instead, he wandered over to where Sirius, Remus, and, to his surprise, Snape already sat at the long table in the backyard of the burrow. They'd lit a lantern against the approaching night. Their Order of Merlin, first classes, which looked quite like Harry's, though without the diamonds in the base, did not quite cast enough of a glow, though they were displayed proudly before them nonetheless. Harry glanced around and grinned. The abundance of awards were the decorative theme. Molly had set them out like candles. The smaller Order of Merlin, second classes, which had been received by all the Weasleys, floated in the air above the table. Harry still found himself shocked by the camaraderie between Snape and the other two. A part of him simply thought it just wasn't normal that the three of them had actively sought each other out. As he watched, Tonks, displaying her rather flashy engagement ring, swung her leg over the bench to sit beside Remus. The floor dropped out from under his feet when he realized what exactly they were talking about. "You damn well are going to be a marauder," Sirius said. "Don't give me any bullshit, Snavellis." "I had planned to rise above it," said Snape. He did not appear as though he wanted to argue at all. In fact, he looked as pleased as Harry had ever seen him. "If you notice, I don't feel compelled to engage in your petty squabbles." Sirius gave a great snort of disbelief. "Sure," he said. "I'll remind you that you said that. Now, we've tried to come up with a marauder name for you, and we just can't do it. You'll have to help us. We've had to put the matter to serious thought," Remus said. "We can't just give you a name that doesn't have any meaning. Which is why I think Greasy is splendid," Sirius interrupted smoothly. "Will the two of you ever grow up?" Snape said. Harry hid a smile. "He's always reminded me of a giant bat," said Harry. "How about Batty?" Sirius and Remus roared with laughter, and Tonks chuckled appreciatively. At Snape's quelling glare, he added, "Sorry, Professor Batty." "What about Slippery?" Tonks asked. Remus winked at her, slipping an arm around her shoulders. Then he exchanged an incredulous look with Sirius. "Girls can't help name marauders," Sirius said kindly. "So sorry, cousin, but even if we did like the name Dash," "Which we don't," Snape said irritably. He kept his face hidden, and Harry suspected that he was smiling. "We couldn't accept it," Remus said apologetically. "Don't look at me like that, love. James made the rules." Several more suggestions, and one hex later, and the tempers at the far side of the table were running high. Snape had just cast a bat bogey hex at Sirius for suggesting Mugglebane. Granted, his heart had obviously not been in it. Only two little bats escaped from Sirius' nostrils, and Sirius continued to laugh, apparently not noticing small winged animals fleeing from his body. "How about Blackheart?" Harry suggested. "Black H-A-R-T, for you know the deer. And it sounds like Blackheart, so your reputation for hating Snape won't be ruined, Sirius." Sirius and Remus looked at each other. Then they looked at Snape with identical expressions of intense concentration. Harry began to wonder how they'd ever named themselves. Perhaps the 4 years they'd spent trying to become Animagi had, in actuality, been spent trying to figure out their nicknames. "I like it," Remus said finally. Sirius' gray eyes glinted wickedly when he turned to Harry. "I'm happy to see that you're so well-adjusted to having a black-hearted rogue like Snivellus Dash." "I believe you are to call me Blackheart now, Dash," Snape interrupted. "Love your mother," Sirius finished. He drew his wand and twirled it in his fingers. "Care to send bats at me again, Blackheart?" Harry rolled his eyes. "When do I get to join the Marauders?" "Sorry, kid." Sirius shook his head sadly. "It's another one of your dad's rules. As soon as you were born, he said to me that you'd have to start your own gang." "You seem to treat my dad's words like law," Harry said slyly. He had suddenly remembered what his father had told him to tell Sirius. "No girls allowed. No kids allowed. Those are the rules," Sirius said. Harry tapped his chin thoughtfully. "I'm sure Dad will be happy that you're still listening to him all these years later." "Are rules anything like bets? Like, if the two of you had made a bet, you'd still honor it, even though he's dead?" "Of course," Sirius said virtuously. "So, I take it you'll be naming your first child Elvin Dork?" Harry asked. "It's unisex, you know." Sirius and Remus gaped at him. Harry smirked to himself as they tried to work out how, exactly, he had known about the terms of some long-forgotten bet. Warmth flooded his belly when he realized that he really had met his parents. His father had given him the gift of proof and tormented his best friend as an added bonus. "How in Merlin's name did you know about that?" Sirius asked. "We never told anyone." "He told me," Harry said simply, "after the curse. Before I came back. He was there, and Mum, and Neville." Harry was not able to elaborate. The moment Sirius opened his mouth to ask questions, Ron and Hermione appeared right next to Harry, and both were in a state of high dudgeon. Hermione's hair had come undone and was floating bushily around her face. Ron's face was bright red. Harry thought they might be fighting again, until Hermione roared. "Merlin has done it again," she shouted. She was quite undone. It appeared as though the mysterious Merlin had finally pushed her too far. "Look at this. Look what he did." She thrust something in Harry's face. To his surprise, it was their copy of Memories Unbound. It was blank. Every single page had been wiped clean. Harry flipped back and forth. Others began to congregate around him, and there were murmurs of shock and consternation. Arthur had returned from wherever he had disappeared to, and the twins had started a lively discussion of their current theory as to whom Merlin had been. "That's not it," Hermione said wrathfully. "Look," she flipped to the very first page. It was the only one with any writing on it. It was spindly and untidy. It had been handwritten rather than typeset. "All had better fucking be well," it read. Harry mouthed the words to himself several times. He thought of the implications of what it meant that the writings of the wise ASP had been obliterated. He had the sneaking suspicion that Merlin had been thorough in his work. Harry doubted that he would ever be privy to the secrets of time travel again. He was grateful. "I guess Merlin doesn't want us traveling in time anymore," he said casually. Hermione spluttered with rage. She apparently did not like having knowledge taken away from her. "At least we know that Merlin isn't Molly," Arthur said unexpectedly. She'd never used that word. Everyone looked over at the Lone Order of Merlin, first class that did not yet have an owner. Harry was not sure if it ever would. Would Merlin even feel the need to come back in time after the truly miraculous way things had played out? But still, the symbol of having someone help, or attempt to help, with the long task of defeating Voldemort was important. "He was a bit of an asshole, wasn't he?" Ron said fondly, and he started to laugh. "Christmas." Harry tripped down the stairs at the Burrow. He'd finally been given an excuse to leave Ginny's side, and if he wanted to carry through with the plan, he had to act fast. Afternoon was already waning, and dinner would be served soon. If he couldn't find Mr. Weasley soon, he'd have to change everything. Mrs. Weasley was busy preparing the various dishes that would be served with Christmas dinner. For a moment, he stood outside the kitchen and breathed in the aroma of truly delicious food. "Mrs. Weasley?" Harry said tentatively. "Oh, hello, Harry dear," she said. She smiled at him, but it did not quite reach her eyes. But Harry pretended like he hadn't noticed. He'd done a great deal of damage when he had shown them the memories. Dumbledore had been right. But even the slight distance was worth being able to spend time with them, to get to know them again. He fully hoped that one day, the past could be forgiven, and if his plan went well, he might just get another Weasley sweater. Where is everyone? Ron hasn't thundered through here demanding food in at least an hour, and I'm starting to get worried. Harry chuckled. Ron's up in the attic hiding, I expect. Once Dora started talking in great detail about her pregnancy, he ran up there, followed closely by Remus and Sirius, I might add. She laughed a little. Man, she said, are we still expecting Albus and Severus? As far as I know, Harry shrugged. As much as he wanted to keep talking to her, this was about the longest conversation they had since Tom Riddle died. He had to talk to Mr. Weasley. Listen, do you know where your husband is? I've got to talk to him. She looked stunned, and something utterly indefinable was in her eyes. He's out in his shed. Harry paused. Of all the places, Mr. Weasley would be in his shed. The last time he had gone to speak to him there. But he pushed that thought away. This is for Ginny, he told himself firmly. It helped that he knew that Mr. Weasley would be polite. He wouldn't turn him away, even if there was that distance between Harry and all the Weasleys except Ginny, Ron, and Percy. Still, he had to ask, do you think he'd mind if I? No, she said quickly. No. Do you want to bring him a snack? Isn't dinner almost ready? Harry asked curiously. She turned away, back to the meal she was preparing, and nodded. Yes, I suppose that wouldn't be a good idea. Would you let him know, when you're done, of course, that dinner will be ready soon? I was about to go out there myself to tell him. Of course, Harry said. As he walked out the back door, he felt both nervous and elated. He could not imagine that Mr. Weasley would refuse him. Everyone in the world knew how much he loved Ginny, but he suspected that every man felt a mild sense of trepidation when they asked a father if they could marry his daughter. Fred, George, Bill, and Charlie almost distracted him. They bewitched a section of the yard to look as it might in the early summer. Fleur sat on a blanket, watching as the four brothers roared with laughter at the game they played with several dozen enchanted umbrellas. Harry grinned. Having fun, he asked. They stopped laughing immediately, though Fleur turned a wide smile at him. Almost as abruptly as the laughter stopped, they all pasted jovial grins on their faces. At least they're trying, Harry thought. The mean looks and hatred were gone. Harry could live with the fact that he'd hurt them, but only hoped that things changed. Hi, Harry, Fred said loudly. We're playing swords with umbrellas, George pointed out needlessly. We could use a fifth. You'd have to be on our team. Bill indicated himself and Charlie. These two are cheaters. It's not Gryffindor's sword, but it's pretty fun. There's a while until dinner, Charlie said. They've been like this for several months now. They tripped all over each other to talk to him, but Harry knew that they didn't really want him there. Still, he may have accepted had he not had things to do. Sorry, Harry said. I've actually got to talk to your dad. All four of them exchanged significant looks, but Harry had no idea what it meant and had no time to try to figure it out. The Weasleys were acting slightly odd, odder than usual, but it could just be Christmas spirit. He's in the shed, Bill said. Thanks, Harry told him. Your mum told me. The door was open a crack, and Harry took a deep breath and pushed it all the way open. He looked at the table first, wondering, with great fondness, what sort of muggle tool had driven Mr. Weasley out here on Christmas Day. He furrowed his brow. There was nothing there. Even stranger, Mr. Weasley sat with his head in his hands. Harry had the momentary urge to run away, but he looked closer and saw that the older man was not crying, but merely looked tired. He looked back at the burrow. It was full of guests at the moment, and would be even more packed with friends and family. He'd probably been looking for an escape. Is it time for dinner, Molly? He asked without looking up. I'll be right out. I thought he might come today. Harry said. Not Mrs. Weasley. Mr. Weasley lifted his head and looked at Harry as if he had seen a ghost. Harry, he said a little bit too enthusiastically. There was again the same thing he'd been noticing for months. The overly nice greeting that cleverly masked the fact that Harry had hurt them badly, but they were making too much of an effort to hide it. Harry did not know whether it would ever completely go away. Hi, Harry said. Mrs. Weasley told me I could find you out here. You didn't bring a snack? Mr. Weasley asked. Well, no. Harry said. What is it with the snacks? Dinner is almost ready. Ah, Mr. Weasley's smile slipped. I suppose. Is there something you'd like to talk about? It sort of sounded like a dismissal, but Harry couldn't be sure. Suddenly, he had to ask Arthur Weasley a different question, and not the one he had been intending to ask. He saw that he could not, in good conscience, ask the second unless he had an answer to the first. Mr. Weasley, Harry licked his suddenly dry lips. Is it possible, do you think that, you'll ever be able to forgive me and the rest of your family? What? He said blankly. They stared at each other, and Mr. Weasley looked just as confused as Harry felt. The moments sped by in silence. Did you just ask if we could forgive you? Mr. Weasley finally spoke. Harry said. Yeah, what I did. Give me a minute. Mr. Weasley held up his hand. He seemed to be steeling himself to do something. Harry, I came out here today hoping that you would join me. I've done it these last several months, whenever I knew you'd be here. Do you know why? Harry shook his head, but he began to feel a bright spark of hope. When you died, he continued, I saw you. So Ginny wasn't the only one to see some sort of vision. He suspected, however, that Arthur Weasley's was quite different from hers. He wondered if Ron had too, and Hermione, Percy, and Luna. And if they did, why didn't they say anything? We were right back here, in this shed, he told him. His eyes were vague, and he stared at a point just over Harry's left shoulder. I asked why you didn't fight, or defend yourself. I didn't understand. I didn't know about the Horcrux in you. Not until later. And you said that it was because you had to, and that you couldn't live with yourself if you walked away and let me die. He paused. It was very personal, Harry. You didn't say all of you or my girlfriend's father. You took that curse and meant to die for all of us. But we all saw different things. Molly, Bill, Charlie, Percy, Fred, and George, and I assume everyone else who had a rune. And I'm having a hard time explaining this. We all felt like it was an individual thing. Like even if I had been the only one in the Great Hall, preparing to fight, you still would have done it. Harry blinked at him. Of course he would have done it. Of course I would have, he said. I had to. It was the only way. Mr. Weasley laughed shakily. Percy said you wouldn't understand. I don't, Harry admitted. Well, maybe a little. If I could go back, I wouldn't have chosen the memories I did when you found out the truth. But the fact of the matter is, Harry felt uncomfortable and vulnerable saying it. But he forced himself to. I love you guys. You don't understand at all, Mr. Weasley said. We know that you love us. How could we not? You died for us. We don't think we deserve it. Harry gaped at him. All of you feel this way? That's why you've been acting strange? It wasn't because I hurt you with those memories. Joy filled him, and he knew he was right. It explained everything. He stood up and couldn't stop himself from grinning from ear to ear. That is quite possibly the best news I've had in a very long time. I thought it was going to take time, but Harry knew that he was being completely incoherent, but it didn't matter at all. Mr. Weasley, he said suddenly. I'll explain in a few minutes, but I'd like to do so with the entire family around. Do you mind? He shook his head. Oh, Harry said, I just have to ask. This'll make it even more perfect. He'd planned a speech, had intended to have a long discussion about how much he wanted to marry Ginny, but he abandoned it. Mr. Weasley, I love your daughter so deeply that I can't imagine living without her. I want to marry her again, but this time with your blessing. Please. Of course, the older man said promptly, but he looked as though he had been hit in the head by a bludger. I can't think of a better man for her. Thank you, Harry said earnestly. Now I need to go back inside. I have things I need to say to all of you. He actually pulled on Mr. Weasley's arm. Now that he knew, he could not possibly wait a moment longer than necessary. Bill, Fleur, Charlie, Fred, and George had already gone inside. Harry drew his wand and said, Sonorous, and feeling almost giddy with relief, said, Everyone please meet me in the sitting room. All Weasleys, all guests. That means you, Ron. I'll make sure that Dora doesn't start talking about how she's preparing for breastfeeding again. Harry hurried across the yard, Mr. Weasley right behind him. He could hear the thunder of many feet going down the stairs, crashes and shouts. Mrs. Weasley opened the door to let them through, and Harry swept her into a tight hug, which she returned just as tightly. I have no idea what's going on, Mr. Weasley told his wife. but he's very happy. Happy didn't even begin to describe what Harry was feeling right now. The thing that he had missed for well over a decade was finally within his grasp. He'd given up on it 5 years ago, but he'd begun to hope for it these last months, and now he almost had it. "What's this about, Harry?" Ron asked. He beamed at them. Hermione sat curled up on Ron's lap in a large armchair. Sirius, Remus, and Dora were squashed next to Bill and Fleur. Charlie and the twins had parked on the floor. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley squeezed their way past them to find a seat on the only empty armchair left in the room. Albus and Severus had apparently just arrived and stood in the doorway. Percy stood by the Christmas tree with his arms around his new girlfriend, Audrey, and Ginny picked her way around her family and came to stand next to him. He didn't think that he'd seen anything quite so wonderful. "You going to say something anytime soon, mate?" Ron asked. "Or have you been drinking?" Harry put his arm around Ginny. I thought that you lot were still hurt by how I showed you those memories. I thought that I had done too much damage that day for it to easily heal. And I was a right arse for months. I treated the lot of you like rubbish," Harry admitted. He could see now that he had, in many ways, treated the Weasleys the way Severus Snape had once treated him. The thought made him uncomfortable and guilty, even now. "Harry, you weren't Percy began. "We deserved it," Bill and Charlie chorused together. "We didn't blame you," Fred said earnestly. But before they could continue to fall all over themselves to ensure Harry that they did not blame him in the slightest for his reprehensible behavior, he held up his hand. Another thought had just occurred to him. "And I've wondered if your distance was due to what happened at Azkaban," Harry said. "I couldn't help but think that you'd wonder." He fixed his eyes on a point somewhere over Severus' shoulder. "If I was just as bad as Voldemort." "Not." He held up his hands swiftly when he saw the mutinous looks. "That I think I am. I just wondered. If I recall correctly, Harry, us Weasleys were the ones to offer the most violent deaths," Arthur said. Harry met his eyes and saw that he was telling the truth. "We never blamed you. I'm not even sure if I blame myself. I thought Percy was dead, you see." Harry nodded. He remembered what he had seen in the Department of Mysteries. He could still see the way the runes shone and shimmered, spinning lazily in the air. "Why didn't you tell me that you had some sort of vision?" Harry asked Ron suddenly. Ron looked surprised. "I thought you knew. How could I possibly have known?" Harry scoffed. "I was mucking about with magic that I don't really understand," he added cheerfully. "How reassuring," Severus murmured. Harry ignored this. Albus, he addressed Dumbledore most of all because he had always had answers, it seemed. "The terrible power wasn't just terrible for me and Voldemort. It was terrible for them." There was a ringing silence. Harry had the disconcerting feeling of once more being the center of attention. He was quite proud of his revelation. He had amazingly forgotten that they had thought him dead, and he had not known that Ginny was not the only one to have a vision. He put himself in their shoes and realized that had it been Ginny or any of the others that had died and had sent a last message, it might have killed him. His high spirits wilted a bit when no one reacted. No one realized the brilliance. And worst of all, Ginny was feeling exasperated and a little amused. "You're completely mental, mate," Ron said finally. "But is this actually new to you?" Ron continued. He sounded incredulous. "What? You think we liked seeing you die and knowing that there wasn't a damn thing we could do about it?" "No," Harry said. "But I accept that you didn't realize what happened with the rune." "Harry," Hermione said coolly. "It was perfect, by the way. We were in the library, and there were books all around, and I said that she paused to clear her throat. It didn't make sense that one person had to do what you did. It was such an imbalance. And you just rolled your eyes at me like you do whenever I'm going off on elf rights or those stupid laws about the centaurs. And you said that not everything has to make sense. Love doesn't really make sense. I'm pretty deep when I'm dead," Harry tried to say flippantly. He felt very uncomfortable all of a sudden. "Don't joke about it," she said forcefully. "It was a beautiful experience, Harry. But it was terrible, too. I can't even describe it, Harry. It hurt quite a lot. If you hadn't come back, I don't know, but I can't imagine ever recovering from it." Not for the first time, Harry wondered what the hell he had done when he'd made those runes. He didn't regret it, and he could tell from the defiant, fierce looks on the faces around him that they didn't regret it either. But still, it was obvious that there had been a level of emotional intimacy breached when he had been hit with the curse. He wondered if his soul had had conversations with their souls on the moment of his death. The thought filled him with a sense of wonder, and the realization that he would likely never find out what he had done. And he didn't really have to. I keep thinking, Molly licked her lips nervously. You were just a little boy when he turned you into the chosen one. I've thought about that a lot these last 2 years, she admitted. She stared down at her hands, and she fisted them in her lap. And when the rune flared, you were just a toddler, and you didn't say anything. But it was terrible knowing that ever since you were barely a year old, you've been set on that course. You were just so vulnerable, just a baby. Harry felt an amazing pressure in his chest. Molly was the closest thing to a living mother that he had. Damn it. And the fact that she had seen that. Maybe they had some of their old closeness after all. But then again, Molly had a great capacity to love. What if it was only because he was the boy who lived? And it could have been anyone off the street that would have made her feel that way, because she was so tender-hearted. It may not even be him. He'd been a complete arse, and just because he loved them doesn't mean that they loved him. Mom, Ginny said loudly. Harry jumped. No, don't dash. Quiet, Harry, she said. Would you just tell him that you love him? Because he's missed you for a very long time, and he's agonizing over it. Harry's entire body twitched with discomfort. He felt trapped. He wanted to run, but he didn't. It was as though his feet were glued to the floor. He felt a little resentful that she would blurt out his emotions like that. He wouldn't do that to her. If she were feeling something obviously private, he wouldn't even consider making it public. Especially now, in this moment. He ruffled his hair and looked up at the ceiling. That hug with Ron before he had thought he was going to die had not been nearly as awkward as this. He was acutely aware of how the skin on his face burned. Of course we love you, Harry. Molly sounded surprised, shocked, even that she had to say it. We just felt like maybe we used to be the people you loved, but it wasn't really us anymore. Harry blinked and remembered his dream. The Weasleys on the other side of the chasm, and a bridge the shape of the rune. He wasn't afraid anymore. Well, I'm sort of afraid that I'm going to cry, Harry amended. It was worse because how often had he wished that he could die for his Weasleys? It had taken external force for him to realize that they were fundamentally the same people. And how could he not love them? That would be like him only loving people for what they did for him, rather than for who they were. The moment swelled, and Harry knew that he needed to say something. He cast about wildly, and then he felt Ginny like a flame in his chest, and she gave him the grace and strength to say what he needed to. He couldn't look anyone in the eye, however. He had his limits. I felt that way for a while, he admitted. He felt that the truth was necessary for this moment. But I'm not very proud of that. I've spent years and years wishing that people would like me for me, rather than because Tom Riddle warped the deepest laws of magic and gave me the tools necessary to defeat him. And you're the same people. You have the same care and concern for your children and loved ones. The same sense of humor, the same temper. It was easier to speak directly to Molly than to the men, though he hoped they knew that he meant the same for them. So yeah, you're the same people. You really are, and I'm sorry that it took me so long to see that. He faltered, then glanced around to look at Arthur's shoulder. He was still not ready to make eye contact. And frankly, if it turns out that my future daughter has traveled back in time to her 12-year-old body, I'll have to spend hours in the shed with you, because I'm sure I'd have a complete breakdown, especially if her shifty husband came with her. Everyone chuckled, as he had intended. Excuse me for a moment, Molly murmured and bustled out of the room. Harry wondered if she was about to burst into tears, though she had never been shy about doing it in front of company before. He still felt anxious, agitated, and desperately uncomfortable. He hoped that the twins had gone temporarily deaf, because once they realized that Harry genuinely cared about them, he'd be fair game for teasing and pranking. It seemed to take forever, but it must have been only a few minutes before Harry could hear her walking back down the stairs. She hesitated for a moment outside the door. Harry could almost see her steeling herself, and thought that she might be feeling as insecure as he did. He felt very exposed, as though he were laying on the ground with a wand pointed at him, and he didn't know if the person was there to help him or hurt him. He was fairly certain that if they rejected what he was offering, and he was already kicking himself for offering it in the first place, they weren't ready to have that same level. He really couldn't expect them to. A little part of him would be lost forever. And it's my own damn fault, Harry thought viciously. I shouldn't have pushed. I made this, she said. I would have given it to you, but I didn't know that you'd want it. And she held out a sweater. For long moments, all Harry could do was stare. It was green, and it looked soft and warm. He could tell without even trying it on that it was just his size. My sweater, he thought stupidly. It was a very simple thing. It was just an article of clothing. It was the sentiment behind it that had his heart beating rather rapidly in his chest. He remembered what his mother had said during his time with her, and he found the truth in her words once again. Always and always. The first time he'd said it, he'd had no idea how much meaning just 2 words would have in his life. Thanks, Harry said quietly. He took it from her, and, not even bothering to take off his other sweater, he pulled it over his head. He could feel Ginny's joy like sunlight, and it compounded his own. And then he knew that this was the moment. He patted his pocket, where the ring he'd purchased was a warm weight. He'd made a speech, but the words he'd wanted to say had flown out of his head. He did, however, remember to kneel, and for the first time, he deliberately sent his emotions to her. They swirled around inside him, and let her know how he had felt the first time he had proposed, that she was his reason for living. He felt the same now, but he was damn glad that they were going to get a wedding with everyone surrounding them. They would raise their children with their family beside them. Their children and Ron and Hermione's would grow up together. He hoped she felt his love for her like a kiss on her soul, because that was how it felt when she did it for him. When her beautiful brown eyes filled with tears, he knew that it had worked. Always and always, bright eyes, he said. His voice was steady, but his hands were not as he reached for hers. Marry me? Again? And this time our entire family will be there to watch. Molly started to sob in the background. Yes, she said immediately. Oh, yes. Harry slipped the ring on her finger. Everyone was talking, laughing, and Harry felt his shoulder clapped again and again, but he literally could not take his eyes off of her face, and he thought he just might burst from the joy of it. It had been a very long road with obstacles that Harry could not have foreseen. But he was finally home.